I'm afraid this seat isn't available anymore. The man's voice was courteous, practiced, but something about the way his eyes avoided Elias's face told a different story. Elias Thorne didn't respond right away. He glanced down at the boarding pass in his hand, then back up at the staff member standing rigidly in front of him. The car was clear, Apex Lounge. Zone A reserved. Confirmed. Elias had selected that seat personally 2 weeks ago. He had flown with this airline dozens of times, more than enough to qualify for priority access, executive perks, and the privileges that came with platinum status. Still, the staffer didn't move. I can offer you another section. Just as comfortable. The phrase wasn't suggestion. Elias looked over the man's shoulder, where a white woman with an expensive handbag waited, her eyes flicking impatiently toward the plush armchair Elias currently occupied. His seat, the one he had earned. Elias Thorne had never needed to raise his voice to be heard. At 43, his reputation did most of the speaking for him. His name was threaded through tech conferences, industry forecasts, and boardroom conversations across continents. As the CEO of Nexus Innovations, one of the fastest-growing artificial intelligence firms in the world, he was used to recognition, used to deference, used to rooms adjusting their temperature the moment he entered. But in the Apex Lounge of Meridian International Airport, recognition wore different clothes. Here, it came tailored in uniform greetings, subtle bows, and whispered welcomes. Just not for him. The lounge itself was a private oasis behind double-pane glass and brushed steel. Warm lighting softened the architecture into a quiet elegance. Designer furniture rested on custom-woven rugs. A self-playing baby grand hummed discreet jazz in the corner. The air held the faint aroma of bergamot and burnt sugar, notes from a signature candle exclusive to the airline's premium class. Everything here was deliberate, expensive, designed for those who no longer thought about cost. Elias did not need to be impressed. He wasn't new money, nor performative with status. His charcoal suit was cut clean, Italian but unbranded. A leather folio rested by his side, containing briefing notes for a deal in Tokyo that could position Nexus as the global leader in AI-led customer interfacing. He had 2 hours before departure. Enough time for tea, maybe a call with legal, and a quick scan of market headlines. His watch buzzed. Elias, COO Japan Council confirmed for morning. Board documents uploaded. He tapped back a short response and leaned further into the comfort of his chair. His posture didn't signal importance. It signaled peace, control, the calm of someone who had built his empire quietly, without favors or shortcuts. There was once a time when silence meant vulnerability. Elias had learned that growing up in South Los Angeles, where his world was limited by concrete cracked sidewalks and the drone of low-flying helicopters. At 10, he learned to code on a library computer. By 14, he had created an algorithm that outperformed most high school math students. But there was no fast track, no lucky break, only grit, sleep-deprived nights, and an unshakable commitment to proving he belonged in rooms that weren't built with him in mind. He built Nexus from the floor of a sublet apartment, pitching investors by day and debugging systems by night. It wasn't about money. It was about mastery and visibility. The irony, of course, is that visibility did not always mean recognition. Even now, a lounge attendant approached with a tray. "Would you care for our jasmine green or white peony?" she asked. Her voice was smooth, but there was hesitation in her eyes. "White peony," Elias replied, closing his tablet. She nodded but didn't move immediately. Her eyes scanned his seat number as if double-checking its legitimacy. Something flickered across her face, an expression Elias knew well. A doubt she couldn't name, but acted on anyway. She returned with the tea moments later, setting it down without eye contact. "Let me know if you need anything else, Mr. Thorne." The Mr. Thorne came late like an afterthought. He nodded politely, not bothering to correct the chill in her delivery. Across the lounge, a white family entered. A man in golf attire, a woman in tailored linen, and 2 young boys. The same attendant beam took their coats and escorted them personally to a window-side seating pod. A bottle of chilled water and warm towels followed within moments. No confirmation of reservation. No scanning IDs. Elias stirred his tea slowly. The scent rose with a steam, fragrant and familiar, but he couldn't shake the thought that his presence had prompted review. Not welcome. A man can wear success, speak fluently in capital, move with the confidence of power, but in certain spaces, his skin speaks first. Elias had spent years ignoring that calculus, not because he believed he was immune, but because he refused to let it set the terms of his life. Still, in this lounge, today, something felt off. He wasn't being questioned, not directly, but the signs were there. Glances held too long, small delays, the measured politeness reserved for people who haven't yet proven they belong. He sipped his tea. It was good, earthy, delicate, but something in the room had turned. Not outwardly, just enough for him to feel it. When the staff member approached with that same polished smile, offering a minor adjustment to his seat, Elias already knew. It wasn't a mistake. It was something else entirely. Elias had just begun scrolling through his presentation outline when he noticed movement in his periphery. A figure approached, tall, suited, exuding the smooth, managerial presence of someone accustomed to apologizing without ever admitting fault. "Good afternoon, sir," the man began, his expression composed but calculated. "My name is Andrew. I oversee lounge operations here at Apex." Elias paused, thumb hovering over his screen. "Yes." Andrew offered a smile so measured it might have been engineered. "There's been an update to our seating assignments. I'm afraid we need you to relocate." He said it gently, as though the inconvenience were minimal, as though Elias might even appreciate the spontaneity. Elias looked up, unfazed. "This is my assigned seat." He turned the tablet toward Andrew, displaying the confirmation with his name, seat code, and elite member status in clear font. Andrew glanced at the screen and nodded as if acknowledging something minor, a discrepancy in a spreadsheet rather than a disruption of entitlement. "I understand, but this section is being restructured to accommodate a returning diplomat. We're prioritizing privacy for international dignitaries." The phrasing was smooth, but Elias noticed a slight emphasis on privacy. He also noticed the way Andrew didn't quite meet his gaze when speaking. "I wasn't informed of any changes," Elias replied evenly. "It's a very recent update," Andrew said. "We'll be happy to reseat you elsewhere. It'll be just as comfortable." Elias said nothing for a moment. He wasn't surprised, just tired. Before he could respond, movement to the right caught his attention. A woman in a cream coat and black sunglasses was being escorted into the lounge. Her shoes clicked with purpose. Her hair was perfectly styled, her posture immaculate. She walked not as a guest, but as someone certain the room had been prepared for her. Andrew turned slightly. "Ah, Miss Langley. Right this way." The woman offered a nod, her eyes glancing briefly at Elias before returning to her phone. Two staff members appeared. One retrieved her bag. Another placed a tray of water and fresh mint on the table next to what had been Elias's seat. His seat. The message was clear now. This wasn't about diplomats. This was choreography. Subtle, efficient, and pre-planned. Elias stood slowly. No sudden movements. No protest. He gathered his folio, his phone, and the cooling tea. Andrew gestured toward a corner pod. "We prepared this area for you. It's equally—" "It's fine," Elias cut in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The pause said everything. He walked past Andrew without another word. Around him, no one made eye contact. A man in a navy blazer turned a page of his newspaper without reading. A woman to Elias's left suddenly became invested in her manicure. The pianist at the corner piano played on, unbothered. The staff offered no apology, no glance, no recognition. Only the room noticed, and the room pretended not to. The humiliation wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. That was part of its design. The reassigned seat was functional, partially enclosed, close to the self-serve bar, adjacent to the hallway leading to the restrooms. It was also visibly different in stature. There were no scented towels here, no private server signed, no customized light controls. Elias sat. He didn't open his laptop again. Instead, he studied a reflection of his former seat in the gloss of the lounge partition. Ms. Langley had removed her sunglasses. She was sipping water and adjusting her handbag, settling in like royalty, reclaiming her throne. What gnawed at Elias wasn't the discomfort. It was a consistency. This pattern, this script. He had seen it in boardrooms, at car rentals, even at private clubs where his signature had built the very technology running the security systems. His wealth granted him access. It did not always guarantee welcome. 2 seats behind him, a young employee, early 20s, clipboard in hand, paused mid-step and glanced between the lounge manager and Elias. Her expression flickered for a moment, as if she knew, as if she wanted to speak. But she kept moving. At the bar, a man whispered something to his companion, and both looked away quickly when Elias's eyes met theirs. No one said a word, but everyone understood. Injustice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers behind a name tag, measured, rehearsed, dressed in policy. Not loud enough to spark outrage, just quiet enough to make the target question whether they imagined it at all. Elias sat still, not because he accepted what had happened, but because he had already started calculating what would come next. Elias sat in the corner pod, shoulders relaxed but breath caught in his chest. The chair was narrower. The air felt cooler here, though the thermostat hadn't changed. He crossed one leg over the other and placed a folio on his lap. Outwardly, he remained composed, but the weight pressing behind his sternum wasn't fatigue. It was restraint. He tapped the side of his thumb against the armrest, a small rhythmic motion, a ritual of discipline. In another room, on another day, someone might mistake it for calm, but Elias was managing something far heavier than discomfort. His eyes drifted downward. His tea sat on the small side table, the surface untouched since the transfer. He had brought it with him like a relic from the seat he was asked to leave behind. It had cooled now, just like the warmth in the room. He hadn't planned to think about high school today, or about how he used to wait outside his counselor's office every Monday, wearing a button-down shirt, hoping she'd endorse his scholarship application. She never did. He hadn't planned to recall college, either. The engineering department at Stanford, where he was always the only black student in advanced systems theory, where classmates would lean over his code only to suggest carefully that he'd missed something obvious, even when his outputs outperformed theirs. And then the venture capital meetings. Clean lobbies, glossy smiles, small talk wrapped around suspicion. They would look at his business projections and say, "Impressive," then look at him and ask, "But who's really leading the tech?" He would reply, "I am." They would blink, hesitate, then nod as if adjusting expectations mid-meeting. That look, that pause, it followed him everywhere. It lived under the surface of handshakes and award speeches. It had no name, but it was familiar enough to need none. Today, in this lounge, it had simply dressed itself in protocol. Elias opened his photo gallery and thumbed past screenshots, PDFs, and receipts until he found what he needed. A photo of his mother. She was standing outside a janitorial supply store, grinning with her mouth open, holding up a faded coupon like it was gold. Her shoes were worn, her uniform creased, but her joy, captured mid-laugh, made the image glow. She had cleaned downtown offices from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. 5 nights a week, so he could attend a private coding camp 2 cities over. She used to sneak him leftovers from the executive kitchen, white people pastries. She'd whisper with a wink. She would tell him, "You don't have to be louder, just sharper." He'd built his poise from those words. She had given him more than permission. She had given him armor. Now, her son sat in a lesser seat, not because of an error, but because someone with less merit carried more assumed entitlement. He exhaled through his nose, slow and measured. The injustice was obvious. His credentials, his reservation, his status, they should have been enough. But something deeper clashed in him now. Rage demanded acknowledgement. Dignity demanded stillness. He knew what would happen if he raised his voice. He'd be seen as aggressive, uncooperative, difficult. So he sat, unmoving, seething beneath a polished silence. He was not confused. This wasn't a misunderstanding. But the space he occupied, physical and social, required him to carry that understanding with surgical precision. One wrong word could become the whole story. That was a trap, Injustice engineered to provoke a reaction that could be used against the person harmed. He would not fall into it. Not here. Not today. Across the lounge, a woman had been watching. Her skin was deep bronze, her locks pinned in a bun, a tablet resting on her lap unopened. She hadn't moved when he was reassigned, but her gaze had never left him. Now, she looked directly at him, and without theatrics, without drawing attention, she mouthed 2 words. "I saw." Elias met her eyes. He didn't smile, but he nodded. That exchange lasted no more than 2 seconds. But it carried the weight of shared understanding, a confirmation that the unspoken had been observed, and that silence did not mean invisibility. Elias reached into his inner pocket and pulled out his phone, not to check emails, not to review contracts, but to write. He opened a new note. His fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment. Then he began typing, slowly, deliberately. They expect silence. They expect shame. They think politeness is a shield. But what they don't know is that I don't need to raise my voice to call something by its name. He paused. Read the words twice. Then added, "They miscalculated." He tapped the screen off and looked up. Back across the lounge, Ms. Langley was reclined, sipping her water, speaking on a phone with quiet laughter. The room had settled again, but its comfort for him had fractured. There was no undoing the moment, but that didn't mean it was over. Across the room, someone else had been watching too, quietly filming with a phone angle behind a leather menu. Within the hour, a clip would leave this lounge and enter the bloodstream of the internet. The post was short. No hashtags. No commentary. They just moved a black CEO out of his lounge seat for a white guy. They absolutely have no idea about who he is. If they knew, they wouldn't have done what they did. He didn't even protest. But everyone noticed. Attached was a 14-second clip. No audio. Just the image of Elias standing calmly, gathering his belongings, while a well-dressed woman took his place. Her smile didn't waver. Neither did the phone in her hand. The post sat dormant for 20 minutes. Then someone retweeted it with a caption. Luxury doesn't mean dignity. Not for everyone. By the end of the hour, it had over 40,000 shares. The lounge name trended. The airline's mentions exploded. Screenshots flooded Reddit, then migrated to Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. It was spreading faster than press releases could catch. At headquarters, a glass tower 600 miles from the airport, the communications team stared at a wall of monitors. Tweets refreshed by the second. The PR director's hands hovered above the keyboard, unsure what to draft. Legal paced. The VP of brand strategy, pale and tight-jawed, said flatly, "We need to act fast. Fire the whole lounge staff. Kill it before it spreads." The head of HR blinked. All of them. Everyone who touched the shift schedule. Everyone in the room. Everyone tied to the logs. "We show zero tolerance." Another exec chimed in. "Let them go before it escalates. Say it was a training violation. But some of them might sue," HR warned. "We'll settle. The cost of that is nothing compared to damage this could do if it escalates." It wasn't about fairness. It was about containment. Maria Flores had just finished her shift when the call came in. She was still in the break room, taking off her apron, when her phone buzzed with a message. Subject: staffing action notification. Immediate. Effective immediately. Your contract with Apex Lounge Services has been terminated for breach of guest management protocol during your 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. Please do not report for future duty. She stared at it, rereading it twice. Her English was strong, but the sentence structure felt hollow and foreign. She had handed Elias a cup of tea. That was it. She hadn't even seen him move seats. "I didn't even know what happened," she whispered aloud. Her voice trembled. Another attendant, Jordan, walked in holding his phone. "You too?" he asked. She nodded, her eyes wide. He looked down. "I gave that woman a towel. That's all I did." Over the next 3 hours, a series of digital dismissals swept through employee inboxes. Some received calls. Others were pulled aside in locker rooms, told not to return. A few discovered their access cards had already been deactivated. It didn't matter if they'd been near Elias or not. Presence alone was enough. Jordan, who had worked at the lounge for 5 years, watched his screen flash red when he tried to clock in again. An error message replaced the schedule. Dina, a single mother of 2, collapsed into a chair outside the security checkpoint. She had been saving for her daughter's asthma treatment. Now, she didn't know if she'd make rent. A cleaning technician, a quiet man named Ernest who'd restocked the restrooms that morning, was told by a supervisor that his paper trail made him vulnerable. He hadn't even interacted with Elias. The dismissals weren't framed as punishment. They were worded clinically: breach of guest trust, failure to uphold discretion, violations of operational discretion protocols. No interviews, no context, no appeals. Some begged for meetings with HR. Others demanded to see video footage. A few tried to call union reps, only to learn that Apex Lounge Services had contracted non-union labor for this tier of staffing. The message was implicit but unmistakable. This was a purge, not a review. By early evening, 16 staff had been terminated, 11 by email, 3 by phone, 2 in person. A handful wept in corridors. Some stood motionless, staring at locked terminals. Others sat outside the lounge exit, still in uniform, unsure where to go. The ones who remained, barely clinging to their shifts, kept their heads down and mouths shut. They scanned their badges slowly, spoke less, looked away. No one asked questions anymore. Injustice doesn't work alone. It always carries a witness and a scapegoat. The system protects itself by discarding those closest to the scene, not the architects of harm, but the ones easiest to blame. Back in the break room, Maria folded her apron neatly. She placed it on top of her locker, closed the door, and walked out without looking back. No farewell, no apology, just the silence left in the place where her job used to be. Elias sat upright in the back of the executive car as it pulled away from the terminal. The skyline blinked past the tinted windows, but his eyes weren't on the city. They were fixed on a single line of text glowing across his phone. 2,186,312 views. It hadn't even been a full day. The clip was now everywhere, on investor Slack channels, private message boards, industry WhatsApp groups. His name was trending, not because he'd spoken, but because he hadn't. He opened a secure app and tapped the contact at the top of his speed dial. Put me through to Elise. Seconds later, his COO's voice came through. I saw it. I need legal on standby, Elias said calmly, and I want a full briefing on the lounge's operating structure. Who runs it? Who owns it? How decisions flow? Already started. Good. One more thing. Yes. Connect me to the airport board. Direct line. Today. By the time Elias arrived at the hotel, his security clearance had already been confirmed at the front desk, and the suite was waiting. He bypassed it. Instead, he walked straight into the meeting room adjacent to the lobby, where Elise was waiting with a team of 3. Nexus's general counsel, their corporate strategy lead, and a senior advisor from shareholder relations. What do we know? He asked, removing his blazer. Elise stepped forward. Meridian Airport Holdings owns the lounge brand. They're funded in part by a private consortium, partially public. You hold indirect stake through Nexus's recent acquisition of Axion Capital. How much? 19%, she replied. Effectively, you're the second largest stakeholder in the holding group. Elias nodded slowly. And no one realized it. They saw a black man in a luxury chair, not the controlling interest in the infrastructure around it. 15 minutes later, a secure conference line was established. On the other end, 3 board members of Meridian Holdings, still unaware of who had asked for the meeting. The call opened with professional greetings. Elias said nothing at first. Then, when it was his turn, he spoke. This is Elias Thorne, CEO of Nexus Innovations. I'd like to discuss an incident that occurred this morning in your Apex lounge. A pause. Audible shifting. Then, a board member's voice stumbled in. Yes, Mr. Thorne. I believe we've been briefed. There was a seating issue. No, there was an act of racial discrimination by your staff, witnessed by dozens, recorded by several, and now viewed by over 2 million people. The silence on the line stretched. I'm aware of your dismissal campaign. I've reviewed internal memos, timestamps, and terminations. I've also spoken with legal advisors. Mr. Thorne, one board member began, we'd like to express our regret. I'm not looking for regret. The line went quiet again. I'm looking for a transparent breakdown of your oversight failures, a record of your DEI compliance audits for the last 5 years, and a copy of your guest conduct protocols. Today, one of the board members cleared their throat. You'll need to submit that request formally through counsel. No, you misunderstand. Elias said, this isn't a request. I have equity leverage. Nexus's acquisition of Axion Capital granted us 19% control of your governance structure, which means I don't need your permission to access internal reviews. There was a sharp intake of breath. A whispered voice tried to mute the line. He owns part of us, someone asked, barely under their breath. Elias continued, his voice level. I don't need statements or handshakes. I need action. Your response will determine your board's credibility. You have until end of day to schedule a live review panel with my office. If I don't see movement, Nexus will exit its position publicly and freeze all pending contracts related to your modernization initiative. He waited. We understand, the lead board member finally said. We'll comply. Good. Then we won't have to escalate further. Elias ended the call. The room remained still for a beat. Elise finally broke the silence. That wasn't loud, but it shook the building. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. His restraint had never been weakness. It had been calculation. And today it was control. Back online, the witness's video had become more than viral. It was now evidence. Threads dissected every frame. Who stood, who looked away, who benefited. News anchors recapped the story hourly. Media analysts speculated on the identity of the removed man, until someone connected the face to Elias's keynote photo from last year's TechFront conference. One tweet stood out. They tried to downgrade a man who owns part of the building. Read that again. The post went viral within minutes. The suite was quiet. Too quiet. Elias lay on top of the covers, fully clothed, one hand resting across his chest, the other behind his head. The blackout curtains had been drawn hours ago, but sleep had refused to arrive. The hotel room offered every luxury: temperature-controlled floors, dimmable lights, touch-responsive blinds. But none of that softened the ache running beneath his skin. Not physical pain. Something else. Something harder to name. His phone buzzed on the bedside table. Elise, try to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be heavy. He didn't respond. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, seeing none of it. He wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way he had been earlier. That heat had cooled into something slower and sharper. It wasn't just about the seat, not even about the public exposure. It was about how easily it had happened, how efficiently his presence had been overwritten. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. He heard the words again, not from the staff member, but from within. They didn't just move me. They erased everything I had earned in front of the world. There had been no warning, no conversation, just a quiet instruction to stand up and step aside. He had complied, out of discipline, but the cost of that compliance was still unfolding. Across the city, in a smaller, dimmer apartment, a woman stared at her phone screen, barely breathing. Camila had 2 children, one asleep beside her, the other stirring in the next room, feverish from a seasonal cold. She'd put off the pharmacy trip until her next paycheck. Now there would be no next paycheck. The termination message still sat unopened in her inbox. She didn't have the strength to tap it again. She had worked for Apex for nearly 4 years. Never missed a shift. Covered holidays. Stayed overtime. Brought in flowers on weekends. She didn't speak up much, but she had been steady. That didn't save her. A few miles away, an older man sat at his kitchen table, hands folded. His name was Lionel, and he had been planning to retire next spring. 32 years of labor across multiple terminals, 5 of them spent at Apex. He didn't drink, didn't smoke. But tonight, a single glass of something amber sat in front of him untouched. He'd served senators, international CEOs, music royalty. Never asked for favors. Never got complaints. When the dismissal came, it was one line. No signature. No farewell. He hadn't even been scheduled near the main lounge that morning. He simply existed within reach. And then there was Malik. No papers. No backup. No network. He had joined Apex 2 years ago through a third-party contractor. Quiet, reliable, fast on his feet. Always wore his badge tight to his chest. Always answered, "Yes, sir," and "Of course, ma'am." Now, with nothing to his name but a locker key and 2 weeks' worth of grocery money, he sat outside a 24-hour laundromat, scrolling through threads in disbelief. He hadn't touched the passenger, hadn't made a single decision that day, but he had been seen, which, in this context, was enough. It began in the comments. Camila posted anonymously on a message board. Anyone else let go after the Elias incident? Within minutes, responses came in. Lionel answered first. Malik followed. Someone dropped a secure group chat link. Others joined. 6, then 12, then 23. They called themselves the Grounded Crew. What started as venting turned into strategy. One member knew someone in employment law. Another had access to payroll records. A few began collecting screenshots, emails, digital time cards. One suggestion turned into a plan. Let's file together. Not just for wrongful termination, for what this says about how we're treated. It wasn't just about reinstatement. It was about dignity. They began scheduling virtual meetings. A legal aid nonprofit agreed to advise them. The wheels began to turn. Quietly, steadily, without permission. Elias scrolled through private reports as he sat by the window. The city's glow reflected faintly off the glass, making it look farther away than it was. A new file had been uploaded by his strategy team. Terminated staff timeline. Names. Shifts. Job titles. Email content. He read every one. Then he opened another tab. An encrypted fund. Set aside quietly. No announcement. No headlines. He transferred a 6-figure sum into a dedicated legal defense account connected to the nonprofit backing the Grounded Crew. No message. No attribution. They wouldn't know it came from him. That wasn't the point. Elias leaned back in his chair, the soft hum of the city vibrating beneath the glass. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself a breath that felt full. He hadn't spoken to the press. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't sent a single tweet. But things were moving, and those who thought they could handle this quietly, erase people, bury discomfort, flatten consequences, were about to learn a lesson written in silence. Justice didn't need a microphone. Sometimes it only needed to begin. The pressure didn't build gradually. It surged. By the third day, a chorus of headlines filled the airwaves. Apex under fire after VIP discrimination incident. CEO removed from lounge seat sparks corporate backlash. Nexus stake threatens airport holding stability. What had started as an anonymous video had become a national story. The initial statement released by Meridian Holdings read as expected. Carefully constructed, vague in ownership. We regret the situation. We are committed to reviewing our policies. We value all passengers equally. It didn't land. It wasn't enough. The Grounded Crew issued a public letter, co-signed by a civil rights law firm. The letter named specific executives. It referenced internal memos, time-stamped access logs, and screenshots from Slack channels showing panic before due process. That letter was picked up by 3 major outlets within 6 hours. By the end of the week, 2 high-ranking board members quietly stepped down. The VP of brand strategy was asked to resign. The chief of guest experience was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. Inside Meridian's corridors, phones rang without pause. Shareholders demanded updates. Elected officials requested documentation. Sponsors began pulling advertising from affiliated brands. And Elias? He didn't issue a tweet. He didn't rush to television. He scheduled one appearance, a press conference. No grand setting. Just a long table, 2 microphones, and a plain backdrop bearing Nexus's logo. When he stepped to the podium, cameras clicked in rapid bursts. He wore a black suit, no tie. His voice, when it came, was level, "I've been asked if I'm angry," he began. "The answer is yes. But this isn't just about me. It's about the culture that made this possible. No theatrics, no finger-pointing, just truth laid bare." He spoke for 6 minutes. He thanked those who spoke up. He praised the courage of the workers who had come forward. And he ended with a single line that would be quoted for weeks. "Power isn't just what you hold. It's how you use it when no one can stop you." The grounded crew filed a collective suit against Apex Lounge Services and its contracting partners for wrongful termination, workplace discrimination, and unlawful retaliation. The filings were precise, backed by receipts, supported by testimony from passengers who had witnessed the events unfold and remained silent until now. The legal pressure triggered a chain reaction. Facing mounting exposure, Meridian Holdings initiated a top-to-bottom audit of its premium service policies across all properties. They hired external equity consultants. They committed to a 24-month anti-bias reform program. It wasn't just training. It was structural reengineering. Seat assignment protocols were rewritten. Complaint systems were decentralized. Lounge attendants were provided with protections, no longer left to absorb policy failures alone. It was not perfection, but it was motion, real motion. The room was small. No cameras, no podiums, just chairs arranged in a semicircle, a long wooden table in the center, bottles of water, one tray of pastries, mostly untouched. Elias arrived quietly. No entourage, just Elise, who sat in the back, taking notes. Across from him sat 7 members of the grounded crew: Camila, Lionel, Malik, and others whose names had barely been spoken in press reports, but who had carried the weight of the story from its first moment. There was tension, not anger, just uncertainty. What do you say to the man whose presence altered the course of your life? Elias broke the silence. "I should have spoken to you sooner." Camila's eyes filled instantly. Malik stared down at his shoes. "I watched what you did," Elias continued. "The courage it took, the risk, the unity. That wasn't small. It was historic." Lionel, the oldest in the room, leaned forward. "You saved us." Elias met his eyes, then shook his head. "No, you stood up. I just helped amplify the sound." A long pause followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full of gratitude, of weight shared, of something unspoken finally named. Before leaving, Elias handed a folder to the group. Inside, confirmation of a formal reinvestment into legal protections for airport service staff across all Nexus partner properties. The funding was unrestricted. The initiative was permanent. He didn't stay for applause. He simply stood, nodded once, and left the room. Outside, a line of reporters waited, but Elias kept walking. He had nothing more to say, not today. The statement had already been made, not in slogans, not in campaigns, but in policy, in action, in the corrected course of a structure that had long tilted the wrong way. 6 months passed. The headlines had quieted. Lawsuits continued through their winding path. Corporate statements became less frequent, more subdued. What remained was not noise, but change. Measurable, visible, rooted. Elias stood in the boarding queue at gate 14, passport in hand. A direct flight to Dakar, a conference on global equity initiatives. He wore no badge of status, just a quiet presence. Still, some recognized him. 2 rows behind him, a boy tugged his mother's sleeve. He looked no older than 8. Curious eyes, gap-toothed smile, knees bouncing with the energy of someone used to waiting. "Mom," he whispered. "That's him." She glanced up, smiled softly, then nodded. The boy stepped closer, not shy, but reverent in a way only children can be. "My mom says you made rich people act right." Elias's lips curved into a warm grin. He crouched slightly to meet the boy's eye level. "She's smarter than most people I know." The boy laughed, then ran back to his mother's side. The boarding line moved forward. Inside Terminal B, just past customs, stood the reimagined Apex Signature Lounge, one of her now operating under the newly revised framework. Gone were the old gatekeepers. In their place, Multilingual signage, equity ambassadors, transparent seating policies, and a guest feedback system that didn't disappear into the void. But the most striking change wasn't logistical. It was human. Staff greeted patrons not by scanning posture or wardrobe, but with measured consistency. Smiles didn't shift by skin tone. Service didn't hesitate. The atmosphere, once tinted with silent judgment, now moved with something closer to balance. Near the lounge's central hallway stood a wall of portraits, etched panels honoring guests and staff who had shaped the institution's future. Elias's was there. Beneath a bronze likeness of his profile were the words, "For reminding us that dignity isn't granted, it's recognized." A server walking by paused briefly, glancing at the inscription before continuing her route. Her uniform bore a pin. Accountability begins with access. Power doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it's the refusal to be moved, the refusal to shrink when told you're an exception, the refusal to disappear just because someone is uncomfortable with your presence, the refusal to let systems erase people in silence. Elias didn't need the tribute. He hadn't asked for the portrait, but he understood its value. It wasn't a celebration of one man. It was a marker for those who'd walked in after him, a signal that someone had pushed, and the door had opened wider. He took one last look before boarding, not back at the wall, but at the people working behind it. They weren't afraid anymore, and that, more than anything else, was the legacy that mattered. Have you ever been told, silently or directly, that you didn't belong somewhere you earned? Tell us in the comments. Share your story, because the more we speak, the harder it becomes to ignore. If Elias's quiet strength moved you, like this video, subscribe to Echoes of Black and help us keep these stories alive. This isn't just content. It's a record, and records, once broken, can't be erased.